jump right into the content. It's a little bit different of a style tonight because this conversation about organizational culture and leadership really is right in my wheelhouse. So I'll probably take the lead in the beginning of class and go over some basic terminologies and some basic, overview. What's culture? Why is it important? How can leaders influence people through culture? This kind of stuff. And I'll do it by just showing you some models that I think will be impactful for you to understand how essentially organizational behavior can be manufactured in some kind of ways, and why that's important for you to understand, because obviously we're going to talk about the implications of that manufacturing of behavior and whether or not the culture, which is a big influence on how people behave, whether or not it's done right, whether or not it's done wrong, whether or not it's done to get people to behave ethically, or potentially done in a way that allows people to, I say, get away with unethical behavior, and then or there's a breeding ground for unethical behavior. And again, it all points back to, and I can kind of see how the book is moving in this direction now, because um, who's to tell whether or not one particular type of behavior is unethical versus another, because people have different value systems, people have different ways of looking at moral philosophies in life, and within organizations, it's sort of a microcosm of what we see in society. And as long as it's not illegal, then an organization can certainly manufacture behaviors that some people in this class might consider to be highly unethical, but other people in the class might not believe so. And one thing is for sure that when I'll say from my experience in business and certainly in leadership, that one of the most important things that I had to focus on and I still have to focus on is performance. And my ability to perform my job, my ability to perform the tasks that are associated with my job will inevitably drive my career. And I enjoy the tension between behaving and acting ethically with performance, because that tension will never go away. And I know that having an ethically, morally grounded organization is important. But I also know that that's not the only thing that's important for organizations. And that's why this class is in effect, because balancing that tension between I have to perform and do my job and I have to do it well, because it's a competitive world. And we need to make sure, whether we're working for a for profit company or even a nonprofit company, even within the government, that we're effective in what we do. We can't just be stuck in this limbo of, well, I'm not sure if I should do it because it might be unethical, or I don't know if the moral code or the ethical conduct around here is going to limit my behavior. And if we stew in that and we settle in that too often, too much, our performance will decrease. Moving at a rate that allows us to perform and moving confidently towards performance objectives is the goal. And I think that's why developing a strong ethical culture that provides a foundation is very important with that. So I heard something the other day, and I kind of related back to families and children. Is a child at times, if a child is, say, misbehaving, or say getting into trouble, let's just say like a third grader is being mischievous and possibly starting to lie and manipulate parents, or maybe their sibling or something like that, that's actually a good sign. At times what they're doing is they're infringing upon the boundaries that you set for them. Certain kinds of behaviors like avoidance or over attachment, or things that possibly could cripple a child, are symptoms of, hey, something might not be right here. For a child to break a rule now and again demonstrates that they're testing the boundaries. They understand that there's boundaries, and when they break a rule, they get in trouble. And I relate that to an organization because it's the same thing. If you're overly attached to your supervisor, or not confident in your role, or you aren't sure whether you should do something and you're kind of frozen in action, these are symptoms of a much bigger problem called organizational culture. And those problems within a culture could lead to performance issues, not just with individuals, but could lead to performance issues with teams, and it could lead to performance issues within the entire company. So that's kind of the basis of, if we agree that it's important that organizations perform, and we know that culture is a big part of that, the question then remains, how do we have a culture that allows us to perform ethically? I think that's the $1 million question. And if you have an answer to it, please write an article, and I'm sure it'll get published in the New York Times and Wall Street Journal, because it's a very difficult dilemma or question to attempt to answer. And every organization is attempting to find that perfect balance between performance and ethical behavior within their culture. So that's what we'll kind of unpack a little bit tonight. Any questions before we get started? But it's a clip. It's called Glenn Gary Glenn Ross is the name of the movie. And it's a pretty ruthless scene where you have these real estate brokers that are in a room, and this head honcho, um, let's just say, I don't want to use the curse word. Like, I'm going to say the curse word. Please don't judge me. Badass broker comes in the room and acts as if he has all the answers. And he's very wealthy and he has a really nice watch. And he sort of disrespects and subordinates in a lot of different ways. You'll see it the people in the room. Yet that broker is performance based. That broker does have some credibility to him. And you'll see the way in which he treats some of the people in the room is questionable. I want to tell you, though, that this particular clip was touted as the way in which one is to act in a competitive real estate situation. And I was told to watch this clip and I was told to sort of abide by this code when I first started working in commercial real estate. It was sort of that, you know, you know, kind of that's doing things below the surface, like sort of, yeah, we're all here in an organization, but we're here to win and we're going to do whatever it takes to win. Nobody said that out loud, but at times that was insinuated. And certainly it was acted out in a lot of ways. And possibly maybe I'll share some stories with you in the commercial real estate days and how some of the relationships were kind of questionable. All right, so I'll ask this kind of an open-ended question, and a lot of these are going to be frameworks. So I'm curious if anyone that's looking at the screen, if you see anything that matters, and I'll ask just a very general, open-ended question. When you look at this framework and you see the task environment, you see the internal environment in the middle, and you see the general environment, what are some things that stand out to you? I mean, we can leverage it and use technology to help us, but how and in which ways technological progress speeds up and changes and impacts the general business environment, just the way in which things are done nowadays. We can't control that. That sort of happens to us. And everything over here to the right, where you see general environment, that's the case with all of that. So think about economic right now. If anyone's looking at the stock market, these tariffs that are put in place, those two things are combined with the legal political environment and the economic environment. Whether or not, I don't care who you are and how um, influential you are within your organization. Right now, the economic and political environment are uncertain. That's a great word to use it. We just don't know, and certainly we can't control it. The international environment, what's happening with other countries and geopolitics, not just geopolitics, but what natural weather forecasts, hurricanes, tsunamis, this kind of stuff. We can't control what's happening in other countries, but that stuff impacts us within our organization, impacts the supply chain. Sociocultural is are things that are changing with the way people behave. When you think about um, feminism being a major thing that's happened in the last 30 years. When you think about advocacy towards Black Lives Matter, when you think about things that have to do with transgender rights, I mean, these are buzz issues and highly controversial subjects, but these are social cultural issues that people are, whether or not they want to talk about it or not, it's becoming something that is uh, changing the way we live. And I'll say another one, like school systems. And I've noticed that a lot of my friends are starting to do homeschooling. This apparently is a thing that people do, and I get it. And it's just an example of how things are changing from the time I was young to where we are now. Social culture issues are things that lie outside of our control. We can respond to them, we can have an opinion, but these things happen to us. And it's the same thing with the natural environment. Uh, this is the hurricanes that are going to come this season. Hopefully, not many, and hopefully they're really none would be a great answer to that. But the question is, can we control it? And the answer is no. So the general environment lies outside of our control. Now let's move over here to the task environment. What do you think about the control factor over here? How much of this can we control? Okay, this is another situation where we can't necessarily control what's going on over here. We do have the ability to influence, and that's at least more than hardly any ability to influence. It's probably going to lie somewhere between a two and a three, possibly a one and a two, depending on how big of a company you are. There's certainty if I have 100 customers that I could fire one if they were mean to me. But the reality is, I can't control the way they act. I can't control whether or not they pay their bills. I can certainly have consequences, and I can certainly, again, fire them or stop doing business with them if I want to. And then, of course, the competitors. I mean, you can't necessarily control your competitors. If you're highly influential within an industry, you might have some impact on your competitors. They might be watching you to see what you're doing and how you're acting and mimic some of your tactics, but you can't control them. The suppliers is a similar situation. I love relationships with suppliers and I hate relationships with suppliers. Suppliers can be your best friends or your worst enemies. And what I mean by that is if suppliers have power over you, for instance, during COVID, we had something called chlorine for our pools that we needed to clean. And this was, to us, it was yellow gold. It was very important for us to function as a business because we had to use it when we cleaned our customers' pools. We had a supplier that simply refused to deliver chlorine to us unless we paid twice the amount we paid prior to COVID. They doubled their prices to us. And the reality was we needed supply. So it took us probably 2.5 months to find another because we certainly were going to fire them. We couldn't continue to do business with them simply because we just didn't trust them anymore. We feel like we were in an inequitable relationship and they mandated it or they decided to drop us. So the point is, we had to pay for 2 months the price that they negotiated. We had no control over it. And, well, of course, we let them go after 2 months because we found another supplier, but that wasn't easy. So the point is the suppliers can really come through for you, and they can help you with your materials. They can help you with, say, your technological needs or, whatever you outsource, say, your human resource outsourcing, or say you're, outsourcing you're building a house and you're outsourcing the plumbing to a particular company that just does the plumbing, and you hire them to just do the plumbing and contract with them, and they're suppliers to you, essentially. The reality is they'll show up on time if you pay them. If you don't pay them, they won't show up. And that's a problem because maybe you don't have the money. Maybe you want to pay them with certain kinds of terms, but they don't want to abide by those terms. You can't necessarily control them. Enough with suppliers. You can see I have a decent amount to say there. Labor market, same deal. We Again, during COVID, we had significant increases in the hourly wages of trade workers. So trade workers were in short demand because of essential businesses and essential businesses can operate. They got really busy. People wanted to fix their house. And where we would typically pay, say, $17 an hour for a pool tech to come in and start working, we then had to hike that up to $19, $20 an hour just to get people interested in the position. Yes, of course, we don't have to pay them that. So we have some control. But the other reality is we really couldn't necessarily dictate the terms the way in which we wanted to. So all of that to say, I'm going to clear this now, is leading into this reality that the internal environment is really what we can control. And the internal environment is probably about a 4 out of 5 on what we can control. We can control who we hire. We can control the control systems of which we incentivize them. How do we track their performance? When they do perform, what do we give them or what do we not give them? We can also control, which the conversation is going to be about tonight, is the culture, the values, the beliefs, the norms in which our organization operates, the stories we tell people, the artifacts, the brand we put up on the wall. And we can certainly control how we manage the organization. So internally, we have a lot more that we can do. And this is the big kicker. I hope that you get this because it took me 32 years of life to get this and many, many, many mistakes and confusion as to what is culture and why is it important. It is so important. Why? Because we can control it, which means we're going to do everything we can to make sure it's good so that we can respond to the task environment and to the general environment when things get out of control. Let me give you an example. There's a hurricane that came 2017 called Irma. The natural environment was shaken. There was tons of turbulence. What do we do? What do we do? Well, we knew what to do because we had a plan. We had a culture of values, norms, and beliefs. We believed in taking care of each other as employees. We believed in hard work. We supported one another. We trusted one another. So when turbulence happened, things got dynamic or uncertain in the external environment, we were able to respond well. That's what culture does is when things are normal and cruising along appropriately, which is maybe, I don't know, depending on how many employees you have and depending on, how crazy your household is, it might be 1 out of every 5 days of the year, things are going really well. But when things aren't going well, your culture, your internal environment is what helps you respond to those threats. I don't want to confuse you any further. I want to show you an image of what that looks like. So here is what's happening in the external environment. And I created this image for a presentation that I gave. And essentially, what's happening in the external environment is turbulence. Great words: dynamism, complexity, and hostility. Dynamism is the pace of change is accelerating. Hostility means the threat to legal and regulatory change happens all the time. Complexity is the interactions among change drivers. We have technological increases with AI, and we have economic uncertainty with tariffs. Like those two things provide significant complexity in the markets. What do we do? Are things going to go well? Are we going to be more effective and more productive? Or are we moving towards protectionism? Like, what does this look like for us? Free trade. It's dynamic, it's uncertain, it's unknown. The pace of change is accelerating. We understand that. Great image. See this little picture in the middle here with the storm? That's the organization. And those people in there, that little lady holding a laptop and the doctor that's sitting at the table, they're cool, calm, and collected. Do you know why? Because of culture, because of values, norms, beliefs, artifacts. The culture has been created so that no matter what's happening outside the organization, inside we're still performing, we understand how to act, and things are going well. I hope that makes sense, and it puts culture into a different lens for you to understand. A lot of people want to talk about it as if, "Oh, yeah, that's just their culture, and here this is the way we do things around here," and this kinda stuff, and yeah, I get it, that's important, and that's an easy way to define it, but when you can understand and harness the power of culture, meaning the true impact it has on people's behavior, and manufacture that culture so that you can respond to those external threats, then you're off to the races as a leader and as a manager, and I want to ask this question to think about it. Imagine yourself in an organization where you don't understand the culture. You don't know how to act. You don't know with one day the manager is going to come up to you and is going to yell at you for doing something wrong. And then the next day, the same manager comes over to you and you're doing the same thing you were doing yesterday, but now they're saying, "Oh, that's good. We like that. Thank you very much." And then you think about a social group or small group of people, a subculture within that organization that is behaving according to the code of conduct, according to the rules and regulations, and they come in on time and they sit in a chair and they never do anything that's too crazy and they don't play loud music and they never talk about anything outside of work. And imagine them. They're just like perfectly good people. And then this other subgroup that is rebellious and is the Harry Potter types, the, Hogwarts, if you understand the reference. They're the ones kinda sneaking down into the basement and kinda breaking the rules and changing things. They're up to no good, but the reality is they're sort of doing things well, meaning they're taking care of the school, they're protecting the school from enemies, and they're fighting the good fight. And then you just have the, Slytherins over here who are just nasty. You know, they're just mean and super competitive, and they're kinda being bullies. And so imagine those 3 groups. How do you know how to act? How do you know how to fit in? What do you do? How do you behave? It's a very convoluted, complex question, and that's really the truth of what happens within organizations. There's not just one culture where it's clearly defined. There's these subgroups, and it's going to be up to you of how you decide how to act. And the better the leader is of that, say, school of Hogwarts, if you're following that example, or your organization, say Dumbledore, if he's up there leading well and he speaks to the entire school and says to the school, "Here's what we're here for. Here's how we act," and tries to drive the thing forward, you can actually take these subcultures and you could bring about the best in all of them and diminish the worst in them. So you're bringing out the best values and the best performance and the best behaviors in the people, and you're taking the unethical and non-performance based and the counterproductive behaviors and you're suppressing them. How do you do that? How do you be the best Dumbledore and leader of your school? Well, if you take a look at the screen, I'm going to give you two things to consider. As a leader, let me see if I can just ask for some participation here. When I say the word consideration, what does that mean to you? In your mind with those two beautifully articulated way of understanding what's happening in the other person's world and what are their needs and their wants and posturing yourself in that mindset. Like you're considerate. "Oh, what's going on with you? How you doing? How's your weekend? What are some variables that are impacting your mood right now? And tell me more." This kind of stuff. If you have that posture as a leader, which is a great posture to have, then tell me what it means, which is different, to initiate structure. What does that mean to you? Is that structure of who's doing what and why are they doing it? What's their role? What's my role? What are the rules here? What do I need to get done before the end of the day? When we have meetings, what does that meeting look like? Is there an agenda? Where is the meeting? Who's going to invite me to the meeting? Why is it that I'm doing this particular task before I do this particular task? What's the prioritization here at this organization? That's initiating structure, goals, responsibilities, roles, team dynamics, not team dynamics, that's too esoteric. Skill sets and competencies of each particular person on the team and why they're doing that because they're good at that. Why I'm doing this because I'm good at this. That's structure. It gives us an understanding of how to operate, how to function. And so if you think about a leader that is only considerate and only operates, let's say, a high level of consideration, low structure. So now we're operating in this area here. So if we're operating here, low structure, high consideration, they actually call this country club management. Country, 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 club management. Why do they call it country club management? What's the image in your mind there? Over and they're like, "Hey, what's up, man?" I'm like, "Hey, how you doing? You want a cigar? You wanna hang out?" This is a country club management, and yes, it's a nice thing to have that relationship with your manager and to be buddy buddy with this person and to have them be highly considerate. "How was your weekend? How you doing? I'm doing good. Tell me more." And then eventually, hopefully, and I test this out sometimes as a professor, and it's so funny how a lot of the students, they want structure. They're like, "Okay, tell me what I need to do, and I'll do it." And if I don't tell them what they need to do, they're like, "What do you mean?" Is it going to be 3 pages or 2 pages, or when do I have to turn it in at 11:59, or can I turn it in at 12:01? And this is good. And the reality is, we think that we just want consideration to people be nice, but imagine what that world would look like with leaders that are only considerate. The reality is we also want structure. So initiating structure is a good thing as well. And I breathe this back to the so really what we want is high structure and high consideration. And I mean, maybe not all the time. Maybe there's certain situations where more structure is good and low consideration is good, or sorry, low structure is good and high consideration. There's better situations where high structure and high consideration are ideal. But you get the point. These are juxtaposed against one another, and the managers need to learn how to navigate through these things. And I promise you that any organization that is super high on consideration is privy to unethical, let's just do this little stop sign, issues. Like there might be bad things happening there. And I say the same thing with organizations that are super high on initiating structure. Managers just walking around telling people what to do, they're creating conflict and you're getting people to perform. If it's super high with no consideration, there might be unethical issues happening there as well. So this plays into the fact that the ways in which people behave, again, will dictate the ways in which the managers treat and lead their employees and their staff members will dictate the way in which the staff members behave. And that I'm not going to repeat again, but hopefully you get the idea. Okay, moving on to the next few things. Again, these are just general frameworks that I want to use to set up the conversation that we're going to have about these difficult ethical things that are happening within an organization. So let's try to avoid the socially responsible, because we know what that is and we talked about that. But this says and ethical organization. So taking a stand on, let's say, ethical issues. What is it in an organization that allows organizations to take stands on these issues? And the leaders are the ones who tend to do that. So who can pick out one that is clearly let's just say what do you say this? Responsible ethical organization. So when you think about a responsible ethical organization, which one of these do you think is the most important? Developing formal mechanisms for dealing with ethical problems. That's actually a really good one. You mentioned the environment. I'm trying to get away from the environment part for a second. I'm thinking about just ethical behaviors. So let's just socially responsible and ethical organizations. Let's just put this one here for now. What else? Developing formal mechanisms for dealing with ethical problems. That's definitely one of them. What else? The first one, minimize abusive supervision throughout the organization. Oh, okay. So if you had these two things, develop formal mechanisms for dealing with unethical problems, and you took action to minimize abusive supervision throughout the organization, those two variables, without a doubt, would reduce the probability of something unethical happening. Agreed. And what was the other one that you mentioned? I'm not trying to confuse two different variables. We're just talking about ethics. Is provide training in ethics. Yes. First, you provide training. Then you certainly look to see if there's abusive behavior happening, and just think about that. If there's abusive behavior happening, what do? Nothing. You kind of look at, oh, wow, that was abusive behavior. And you bring them in and say, hey, do you know that's abusive behavior? And they say, yeah, I know it's abusive behavior. And say, okay, thanks for the chat. See you later. And there's no formal mechanism for dealing with it. And also, here's the thing. Okay, so let's just say that your organization, whatever organization you work for right now, uh, told you don't steal office supplies from the cabinet. Don't steal office supplies from the cabinet. And you're like looking around and you see Johnny stealing and Sarah's stealing and Livio's over here stealing. Everyone's sort of stealing, and you're like, well, what's going on? I mean, they're just clearly taking stuff out of the cabinet. I thought it was a rule. And you find out that they don't want you to steal from the cabinet. But if you do steal from the cabinet and you get caught, which doesn't really happen very often, all you have to do is just put it back. You just have to tell them what you stole, and you have to like give them the money that it cost of the stuff you stole. And that was the only repercussion you experienced. Essentially, there is enforcement. There is a code of conduct. Like, hey, we don't want to steal. But if you were to steal, the punishment is essentially nothing. So again, I just frame that to think: is that a good mechanism for dealing with ethical problems? Will that change people's behavior? And do those things matter? And hopefully, you say yes. Okay, what else here is something that you think would be important in creating an ethical organization? There you go.
Yes,
Like,
yeah.
what do we mean ethical conduct? As we learned in last class, some people think that hedonism is fine. Like I can play my rock and roll music, or let's say not rock and roll, heavy metal music in the middle of the office while drinking tequila and drinking mayonnaise at the same time. And this is what we do around here, right? Like, no, that's not what we do, and that's not the kind of conduct that we have. And well, until we tell people that that's not how we behave, they don't know what to do. So we have to establish written codes of ethical conduct. Very important. And also think about that code. Let's say that code is like instead of the 10 commandments, it's like the Mosaic law, or it's 365 things that you cannot do. And first of all, you're never probably going to read them all. And also you're going to worry about whether or not you can even move around an organization. And every day you're gonna ask your spouse or your mom or dad, like, "Am I even dressed right? I'm not sure because I don't know if should I shave? Am I allowed to wear shoes?" You don't know how to act. So if the code is too long, you got a problem. And if the code doesn't exist, you have a problem. So what does that code look like? Again, these are things to consider when you're developing culture, when you're changing behaviors, when you're trying to establish a ethical environment. Okay, let's do one more. What else do you think is important? Actually one that we're going to talk about tonight and which is really important. So here's a fun fact about this one. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act Oxley Act, I'm pretty sure is how you pronounce it, um, basically incentivized people that if there's financial manipulation or financial fraud happening within an organization with a publicly traded company, that the whistleblowers are actually incentivized up to 10, 20, or 30% of the proceeds that are discovered. Meaning, okay, so you find out that an organization is misreporting their financial information to the extent of like, $300 million a year. And that's a problem. Like it's a big company, it's a problem. And you have substantial enough evidence to claim that this is true. So when you report it and you blow whistle on it and you say this is happening, Sarbanes-Oxley has a clause in there that you can say claim 10% of $300 million. So you actually get rewarded for blowing the whistle. So think about that incentive structure. If that's true and that's the case, you better believe that there are auditors that are ensuring that they're doing a good job because you don't even know whether or not somebody even on your same team. I don't know if that's a good thing because people are sort of telling on each other, but the reality is you don't want them to perform unethically. And understanding that whistleblowers can be the best thing that's ever happened for an organization, especially when they're calling out unethical behavior, how you accept them into your organization, how you promote them, and certainly how you treat them after they blow the whistle is critical, or hopefully maintaining anonymity because we might not want to know who those people probably don't want you to know who they are. And maybe some organizations want to know who's this person that blew the whistle on us. And instead of saying, hey, fair enough, we get it and we did it and we admit to it and we're thankful for whatever whistleblower did it. And that's it. That's how they accept whistleblowers. That's a good one. Lydia. Okay, so there's a couple more. I like this creating a pleasant workplace because I think there's a lot that goes into that. Um, so strategic leadership is interesting. Help build environmental, engage in social entrepreneurship. This is a fascinating one. Philanthropy work with suppliers to improve working conditions. Think about that. Taking a stand on social issues. So you get the idea. I'll just say one thing about creating a pleasant workspace. We had this opportunity I explained to you to partner with a private equity firm. And in the process of partnering with a private equity firm, we also purchased a competitor, somebody who we were competing against at the time. And the boss, essentially the owner of this competitive company that we initially were competing with them. Their company was here, our company was here. We were not on the same team. We were unfriendly towards one another. We are trying to take business from one another. You understand. The private equity company came and bought us and also bought this company. But at this company, they had an owner that was integrated into our organization. So now we had to operate together. And this owner over here he had Machiavellian tendencies, let's put it that way, somewhat oppressive, tyrannical in a lot of ways. I'm not the only one to say this. And he came into our work environment. He created what would be considered an unpleasant workspace where he was treating people and talking about people and threatening to fire people in ways that my organization had never experienced before because that's not how we treated our staff. And because of that, I noticed a crippling of our culture. People were confused. They were scared. They didn't know what was going on. There was too many changes. There was a dictator over here. And I was telling them, don't worry, don't pay attention to it. But he was saying a different message. It was not unsafe. It was an unpleasant workspace. In certain cases, it was unsafe. So that would be what I would consider that if you don't have an environment, if you feel like you're going into a hostile environment within your organization, day in and day out, and you can sense, I think that the terminology I used, you come onto the presence of your campus or your building, or you're coming around your cube, or you're walking in through the doors of your organization, and your blood pressure starts to rise, and your heart rate sort of starts to kind of get going a little bit, and your anxiety starts tensing up. Because that happens all the time within your work environment, we don't need to diagnose it any further. There's something going on there that might not be safe, it might not be healthy, and it should be addressed. And I certainly, during this transition of our companies, experienced that every single day at work because it was just so much going on and it was too much stuff happening. And it became toxic in a lot of different ways. I don't like to use that word, but I think you understand what I mean. Um, it wasn't pleasant. It's a better way to put it. All right. So you got a leader, and a leader is meant to drive vision. A leader is meant to influence other people. Really, technically, leadership is the process of influencing others to achieve an organizational goal. And you can replace that with leadership is a process of influence to achieve a goal, or leadership is the process of influencing people to get something that they want and that you want. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can see it, but you have to understand it's a process because it can be broken down, it can be looked at, it can be taught, and it can be manufactured because leadership isn't just, you're a leader and you're not a leader. No, you can learn the skills and techniques and tactics to influence people. So it's a process. And then, of course, if it doesn't have influence, if you're not influencing people, then what are you doing? And then, of course, if you don't have a goal or a vision or a desired future state, like where are we going, then you're probably not leading anyone anywhere. So those three pillars, I believe, need to be in the definition of leadership. And so what one of the theories or the camps of leadership, the leadership philosophy, I guess you can say, or scholarship, is about this trait-based approach to leadership, looking at the leaders based on their traits and saying that effective leaders usually have these types of traits in order to be effective. It's only one of many different ways to look at leadership, but in that school of thought, here are some of the traits that say leaders have in order to be effective. So who sees one on here that resonates with them that says, "Yeah, I want a leader to have this." Just pick one. No, you're right. Humility is, in essence, it's a virtue. It's a part of wisdom is not being overly gregarious or arrogant about what one knows or how one can perform. It's being humble. And maybe we've seen NBA basketball players who have been not so humble in the past. Let's say Allen Iverson's interview with he's talking about practice. That was an exhortation of a lack of humility. Versus, let's say, Steph Curry, who is one of the best three-point shooters ever in the entire world. He's pretty humble the way he walks and the way he carries himself. And so who do we allow to influence us more? I would venture to say it's the person who is more humble. And those people tend to have greater influence over time, according to this chart. So that was good. What would it look like to work for a leader or to be in a work environment where a leader is apathetic, indifferent, pessimistic, and cold?
It's
So
terrible.
if you can imagine, it's terrible. And they might influence you for a bit in a negative way. It's called emotional contagion. Hopefully, when I'm with you all in this conversation tonight, you can see that I'm somewhat upbeat. I enjoy talking about what I'm talking about, and hopefully, it impacts your emotion, which impacts your engagement, which impacts your ability to learn and enjoy class. If I was just sort of apathetic. This is great. And we have sense of humor. That's important. Authenticity and extroversion. And whether you like this or not, it doesn't really matter to me. I'm just going to keep teaching. And I don't know if you guys really understand. I'm very pessimistic about this class tonight. And I'm kind of cold towards, well, towards teaching in general. Like, could you imagine 2.5 hours of that? And the reason why I say that is, could you imagine being a leader who acted like that and thought that they had a positive impact on the people around them? We can't be indifferent. We can't be apathetic towards our role of developing culture and towards ethics. We can't be pessimistic all the time. We can be pessimistic in some situations, that's understandable, but being optimistic gets people to gravitate towards us. And of course, being warm, being inviting. Come in my office, sit down. Not, when you go to see somebody in their office and looking at you like, why are you here? You know, who are you and why are you buying? And they're like, you got 20 seconds to tell me what you need, or else I got to go back to work. Like, who wants to work with a person like that? That's not fun. Okay, thank you for that example. I correlate that with initiating structure. Remember, we talked about the consideration with initiating structure and how important it is that when it's time to get to work, that you have a leader who's self-confident and a leader who understands that at times you need to tell people what to do. And that's okay. That's sort of your role. Hey, break's over. Let's get back to work. Thank you, because we've been standing around here for 20 minutes and everybody's just standing here. I didn't know when we were supposed to work. And thank you for telling us it's time to go back to work. I'll see you later. It's not a bad thing to be assertive and to be self-confident as a leader. And it helps you. Thank you, Aiden, for saying that with your influence as a leader. And one of the things that I'll point out extroversion just for a moment, because I struggle with it at times, is getting in front of people. I could very well go to my cubicle and produce all day long. And yes, I'm producing and I'm doing things that are helpful towards the organization. On my way out today, as I was leaving the college, I had a great conversation with a fellow faculty member that I've been working with him for 8 months now, and we weren't able to connect at that level for a long time, but I was intentional about it. I said, you know what? I was in my desk doing my work all day long, getting stuff done with my head down, with my headphones on, getting ready for class, grading stuff, responding to emails, doing administrative tasks. And I could have very well just sped out the door and that could have been it. But when I saw this person, I chose to walk with them, even though I on my mind. I was like, man, I got to go back because I forgot something, but I didn't. And I stayed with them and I had like a 15-minute conversation with them. It was one of the best conversations I had in a while. That's extroversion, being okay with being around other people, spending time with other people, getting in front of people, liking spending time with other people, and getting energy from your interactions with other people. Think about it. If you're trying to influence people in the workplace, if you're trying to shape a culture, if you're trying to create an ethical organization, you've got to be in front of people, show them how to act, walk it out, be the change you want to be, as Mahatma Gandhi would say. Um, Model the behavior you're trying to get other people to do. And so good leaders know how to do that and they see the importance of that. All right, so let's watch this, what would sort of be considered the antithesis of maybe some of the things on here.
Well, let's talk about something important. Are they all here?
All but one.
Well, I'm going anyway. Let's talk about something important. Put that coffee down. Coffee's for closers only.
I wanted to show you what corporate culture was like 30 years ago in commercial real estate. And that movie was no joke. That movie is how people were treated in certain ways within organizations. And let me put it frankly, because I have, as a professor with academic freedom, and I watched American History X when I was in high school. So again, in my mind, I was like, I'm pretty sure these adults can handle this. That's sometimes how culture is today. And it breaks my heart to say that, but it is true. So now let's talk about it. What was going on there? So let me put the extreme. Let's just say one extreme is they're all fired. They never get that speech, right? So let me try to create the juxtaposition here. If they're just fired and they never get that speech, maybe they never get a chance to have a fire lit underneath them so that they do something, so that they perform. Yeah, the way in which this guy went about doing it was rude and nasty and disgusting. But do you think it made a difference in the way they behave? Well, let me ask this question. If you were working in an organization like that and this guy came in, would you continue working there or you would quit?
For
I
the
wish I had played the clean version where the curse words were bleeped out, but hey, it is what it is. So what you're saying is, I'm happy you said it, is that the tactics were abrasive, but they possibly could be effective, meaning they could have created influence. They probably influenced the behavior, whether it's behavior to quit or whether it's behavior to do something different. Yeah, so there could be a positive side to it. All right. So any other general comments? Because I'm going to try to do my best to kind of unravel how this applies to the content we're talking about tonight. Yeah, and there can be, again, a lot to say, and it's hard for me to erase the way in which he went about doing it and the language he used, which was completely tough to hear. But when you think about assertiveness and confidence, that is that to the extreme. Of course, the value system behind it could have been juxtaposed, but he valued money, he valued success, and like Gabriella was saying, if if he does have something that he could potentially offer, some advice, some mentorship, some kind of help, and he was able to achieve that in that conversation to say, "Hey, if you want this, this is yours for the taking, but you have to want it." And maybe there's one or two people in the room that say, "You know what? I'm gonna change my style tomorrow. I'm gonna change my routine. I'm gonna get up. I'm gonna make those calls. I'm gonna go to the table. I'm gonna have those that confidence, and I'm gonna close deals. And I'm gonna do my best because not only is that gonna be good for me, it's gonna be good for the organization. It's gonna be good to everyone around me." So here's my unraveling of that. And I want you to think about the things that aren't being shown. So the purpose of me playing that was to show the juxtaposition between two different cultures. So you have, and I want to try to get you to understand that there's a villain here that isn't being shown. And when I say it's a villain that isn't being shown, the leader and culture in culture A. Culture A is the culture that was happening before that guy walked into the room. Call it this lackadaisical culture, country club management culture, the culture in which people were just sort of showing up to work, hanging out, doing whatever they got to do, maybe not making calls, the feet on the desk. The leader and culture developer, whether they know it or not, was creating a culture that was no good. And when I say no good, here's what I mean by that. If we don't perform, if we're just considerate and we don't perform, it means people are going to get fired. That's not a good leader, even though they might be nice and maybe they have the right value systems and they don't use curse words and they're super, they bring people together and they're so fun to be with, but they create a culture like that. that might be the real villain. I'm trying to think of a superhero movie who has this particular person, the apathetic leader, the indifferent leader that isn't engaged, that is abdicating their responsibilities of getting people to perform. Sometimes those leaders could be worse than this guy coming in. So, all right, so this leader in this social culture, let's say laid back, no performance, people might get fired. And I'm going to venture to say people could act unethically. They could take advantage of company time. They could, maybe they're drinking booze on the job. I mean, who knows what they're doing because it's laid back. So let's juxtapose that culture to this new culture. And let's just say, again, there's nothing good about, was someone going to say something? Let me try to point out the negatives of this culture here. This culture very well, again, the extreme could be performance based. Sorry, my spelling is not great, but it doesn't matter. So this culture is performance based. It's competitive, right? It's achievement oriented. And this culture too could breed unethical behavior. Because now what are we doing? We're only initiating structure. We're treating people horribly. We're calling them names. We're using Machiavellian manipulative tactics to influence people towards performance. This too is a culture that might have short-term gain, but at the expense of whom is my point. Like the customers, they might buy something that they don't need. Why? Because we got to sell. Always be closing. That's all we're thinking about. Close, close, close. This guy with the suitcase and the watch tells me I got to close. I'm going to do whatever it takes to close the deal. So you got a country club management culture over here, and you got a super high performance initiating structure with no consideration over here. Both cultures tend to exist in this world that we live in, and both cultures can breed unethical behavior. So that's kind of the point with that. Does that make sense? So back to the point of the class, and again, there's like a part of my heart that's like sinks my heart, like, geez, maybe I shouldn't have played that. But again, maybe it has that emotional effect that you guys feel that will help you realize the importance of culture and how either one of those extremes breed the types of behavior that we either want or don't want. So just for the sake of time, I'm going to do a couple more slides and I'm going to really get into the essence of what this um, topic is about. So let me share this for a second and let me ask these questions. Now that we know culture is important, now that we know culture can truly impact people's behavior, now that we know how leaders can specifically influence culture, whether that's a good leader or a leader who maybe isn't behaving accordingly, I want you to think about an organization that you're currently working for or an organization that you've worked for in the past. And I'm sharing my screen. I'm pretty sure you guys can see it. And there's questions here. And I want you, if you can, take out a piece of paper or just maybe you remember in your mind. I'm going to read these questions out loud. All you have to do is say, yes, my organization is doing that, or no, my organization is not doing that. So this is going to essentially test the ethical nature, the ethicalness of your current culture or the culture that you worked for in a previous company. Number one, does leadership promote and model ethical behavior? Yes or no? Number two, are employees taught what ethical behavior looks like in training or manuals? Yes or no? Are there rules or systems to report unethical behavior? Yes or no? Does the company reward doing the right thing? This is so important, even if it doesn't make money. Yes or no? Number five, do people in a company treat each other with fairness and respect? Yes or no? Number six, is it okay to talk openly with your boss about ethical concerns? Yes or no? Number seven, is the company more focused on long-term success than quick profits? Yes or no? Eight, is discrimination or harassment clearly not tolerated? Yes or no? Number nine, are there role models or heroes in the company who act with integrity? Yes, no. Last one, number 10, does the company care about its impact on customers, the environment, or society? Well, that's kind of three things. They could care about the customers, but not the environment. So it's difficult to answer that question with yes or no. But in general, you might be able to answer that question yes or no. So think to yourself now, if you're an employee or even a manager within this company, think about it from both perspectives as an employee and also as a manager. How many no's are you willing to put up with? And if you, I would venture to say that a decently ethical organization, at least the floor where I'd want to start, is at least an 8 out of 10. So if you're falling into a seven, meaning 8 yeses out of 10, so only 2 no's. If you're falling into the 7 yeses and 3 no's, look at this list. What are the 3 no's? And are those things acceptable? Would you want to work in a company where discrimination or harassment is clearly not tolerated? Would you want to work in a company where leaders promote and model unethical behavior? So if you got to know in either one of those, is that even acceptable? And some people might say only a 10 out of 10 here with all yeses is acceptable. And some of you are probably working in organizations right now where you can click yes, right down this chart here. Some of you might be working in organizations where you're going to click no. And some of you may have experienced, some level of PTSD watching the video because you've been treated like that in the past, or you've been talked to like that in the past, where performance is the only way in which you create your identity. You might think to yourself, or maybe I've thought to myself in the past, I don't want to project my emotions, that it's never enough, that I have to keep doing more. Because the only way that people are going to like me and the only way that people are going to appreciate me around here is if I work harder and I produce more. And that can be really, really hard to sustain over a certain period of time. So this is just a general baseline of thinking to yourself, all right, where are we starting here? And is it my duty to influence this culture? If you're a manager leader, I'm saying yes. If you're an employee, your question is, do I want to be a whistleblower or call certain things out or report on some of my colleagues or even report on my own manager or potentially go work somewhere else or think that my mission in this company, my calling might be to stay here and to influence this culture positively over the next couple of years. If you're in a small business and maybe you don't have like a corporate mentality, or maybe there's not enough policy and all of these kinds of things that bigger businesses, medium-sized businesses, that as they scale, they start putting in systems and control processes and culture intentionally. Smaller businesses, they might not have this. So owners of small businesses, they just need customers. They need cash flow. They just need production. And when you're focused on those things, a lot of times you allow the culture and the toxicity of the culture to slip away from you, and it's dictated by the wrong people, the people who have a loud voice and don't have the right values. That's a problem. I think I had mentioned in my organization that I had a gentleman that was managing a division, a pretty large division with, let's say, over 40 employees that were working under his leadership. That was he was having an affair with his wife. And it was sort of known by a decent amount of people in the office. And the person he was having an affair with was the maid that cleaned our office. And can you imagine? And then this manager had the tenacity to tell me about it. And obviously to myself, I was like, "Whoa, this is tough." And when I was young, when this was when I was like before like maybe 28, 29, 30, I didn't know what to do about it because he was a good performer. He was a leader. And now, of course, like 2 years later, maybe a year later, he ended up getting fired, and that's a long story. But now I look back and I'm like, I can't even believe that I created an environment that even allowed that to happen. So it's my fault. So I put that burden or that onus on me in some sense. And certainly when I heard about it, I didn't take immediate action. So if you were an employee working for me at the time and you went through this list, maybe you would click no. And so this is why my plea to you, and maybe that shock to you to show you that video and to share these stories in an authentic manner, is that this stuff matters. It's very important. Instead of taking a break, because I feel like I'm a little bit on a roll, I'm just going to keep going here. So I want to talk about a couple of different cultures within an organization and how you maybe can see some of these behaviors manifest themselves. So the book in chapter 8 talks about these 4 organizational culture classifications. There's a couple different ways that scholars classify these cultures. But when you took that quiz, maybe one of these will resonate with you. When you took that little assessment about your current organization, think about an apathetic culture. We talked about this term apathetic often. Um, it's the opposite of enthusiastic. Apathetic is sort of laid back and I don't really care kind of culture. Possibly culture A in the video, the culture where the people weren't really performing well. Minimal concern for either people or performance. Apathetic culture. Okay, now we have a caring culture. High concern for people, but minimal concern for performance issues. Now we have an exacting culture. Little concern for people. This is culture B now, but a high concern for performance. That's an exacting culture. And then you have an integrative culture where it's high concern for people and performance. So if you think about this, does anybody currently work for an organization now, or maybe they've worked for an organization in the past with an apathetic culture, minimal concern for either people or performance? Okay, how about a caring culture? High concern for people, but minimal concern for performance issues. Okay. Anyone in exacting culture, little concern for people, but a high concern for performance? One of the things that I'll ask, because that was well said, is that when you go to work, or
Yeah.
if you were to go to work in said environment, would you feel like you're bringing both your head, your mind, and your heart, your emotions, or are you just bringing your head and you're
I
just sort
have
of
it.
emotionless?
Yeah.
Imagine in a world where you are the CEO of a major hospital system and
Mm.
you now have the scepter, if you would, or the control over how you shape culture, which obviously shapes behavior. And the people on your team brought both their head and their heart to work every single day. Do you think you would get better performance out of those people? We were to rank these different cultures: apathetic, caring, exacting, and integrative, strictly on will this organization be successful in the long term, or will this organization be ethical and successful in the long term? Which one do you think sets us up for the best outcome? Okay, good. I mean, there's really no answer to that. Here's a good slide to transition the conversation into, because you can see that each one of these companies here, Ben and Jerry's, Countrywide Financial, Starbucks, and United Parcel Systems, these are all companies that you might know and that have seen some level of success. So the reality is all of these cultures have their value in a sense, and all of these cultures exist. So think about apathetic culture, which was clearly ranked like the fourth on the list. When would this culture be appropriate? Well, Countrywide Financial seemed to show little concern for employees and customers. The company's culture appeared to encourage unethical conduct in exchange for profit. So I guess that's not a good example. So it seems like the apathetic culture led to unethical things, which I think would be understandable. So now let's go up the list. So now we have caring culture. So Ben and Jerry's embrace community causes, treats its employees fairly, and expends numerous resources to enhance the well-being of its customers. So there's a caring culture example. Now we have exacting culture. United Parcel Service, I didn't know this, maybe people who work for UPS employees are held to high standards to ensure maximum performance, consistency of delivery, and efficiency. I saw a rant, I don't know if it was correct or not, but it was a lady, it was a maybe a TikTok video or something, who was so upset with having to deliver the package to this person's house that they like flipped out on the ring system, like the video hammered her, and she just had a meltdown because she was so frustrated that every single time she had to deliver to this one particular house, she had to like go through the gate, and there were like dogs, and it was so frustrating for her. And maybe I understand that behavior now that I understand that UPS, you got to get in and get out. Also, we have UPS drivers in our neighborhood here that are driving way too fast. And think about how that. Okay, so let me try to break it down for a second. You're a UPS driver and you're driving a truck. And at the end of the day, you can have a 10-hour day, and in that 10-hour day, you have to deliver, let's say, 100 packages. And if you can deliver that same 100 packages in 6 hours, then you can leave and have the same amount of compensation. So it doesn't matter how much time it takes you. Essentially, you just need to make sure you deliver these packages. They care nothing about customer experience. They care nothing about the way you drive. They don't care anything about that. Obviously, you're going to drive fast. You're not going to say hello to customers, and you're just going to deliver. I mean, not obviously, but a lot of people probably just run in and out. They're completely oblivious to what's happening because they just need to make sure they get these packages done so that they can finish their day and get out of there. Versus, so that's a company that's essentially incentivizing on performance versus a company that pays their workers hourly. And whether you deliver 80 packages or 100 packages, as long as you do it safely and with care, and maybe they survey the customers to see how you're doing, and maybe they look at your GPS to make sure you're not speeding. And so there's a different kind of control system and incentive for that organization. You're going to get different behaviors out of that person. That's the point. So I'll break it down and give you this simple example for a second. You're a motorcycle. You have a motorcycle, a beautiful motorcycle, and it's let's just say it's a Harley Davidson. And you take this Harley Davidson. You guys can still see my screen, and you bring this beautiful bike. Let me see if I can get a nice looking one. It's a decent looking one. And you bring this amazing bike into the local mechanic shop. And you noticed that the mechanic shop has mechanics that there's two different shops you go to. The one shop you go to has mechanics that are incentivized on how many work orders they do in a day. So all the mechanics care is about getting more work orders done on your Harley Davidson bike and other repairs, because they make more money. So that's one mechanic shop. The second mechanic shop, strictly, they obviously do the same thing, but they're just get paid by the hour, and they also do bike repairs and all this kind of stuff. Now tell me for a second, if you had your Harley Davidson, which mechanic shop would you want to take it to? The one that pays people based on the work order and production, or the one that pays people per the hour, and why? I'm sure that we can see how those particular control systems and incentive structures could potentially lead towards unethical behavior at both extremes, which is interesting. And that's kind of what I was trying to draw out is at one extreme, you could do things too fast and just care about your own best interest and trying to get the work done and you could either damage a vehicle or whatever. And then the other extreme is if you're only looked at and paid by the hour, nobody cares about your production, then very well you could just kind of la ti da and hang out, drink coffee, and do one or two work orders a day. And that's a problem too. But I would want to take my vehicle to a place where the mechanics are paid by the hour, simply because I want them to do the best job and I want them to take their time diagnosing and fixing my car. So that's the point there. Any other insight to share on that? This is open to anyone in the class. Okay, so this is just another way to look at it, and it's another way to classify some of these cultures. And as you can see here, there's a bit of a box dynamic where you have the needs of the environment being either flexible, things are changing all the time, or stability. Our organization doesn't really change much, say like the government or um, let's think about the airlines industry isn't that dynamic. It's pretty much the same kind of concept as it was 20 years ago, versus let's say technology like Uber and Lyft. I mean, that's a you have to be highly flexible and adaptive in these kind of startup environments versus the stability environment. And then over here is an internal focus, I mean, we care a lot about our employees versus an external focus is we care a lot about our customers. So let me define these and we'll go back to them. In a second, again, think about the organization you work for and think about or an organization that you used to work for and answer this. Does the organization you work for have an adaptability culture? Are they highly responsive? They value the ability to rapidly detect, interpret, and translate signals from the environment into new behaviors. That would be an adaptability culture, which would be flexible. They care about the needs of the environment as a flexibility, and they care about external focus. They care about the customers, not as much as the employees. Then you have your achievement culture. They're results oriented, values competitiveness, aggressiveness, personal initiative, cost cutting, and willingness to work long and hard to achieve results. So that's an achievement culture. And that would be stability, somewhat of a stability in the needs of the environment. I think about banking or let's say loan officers in this situation. And they're external focus. So they care about the customers and they care about the stability in the environment, meaning things aren't changing that much. That would be an achievement culture. And then you have an involvement culture, internally focused, values meeting the needs of employees as well as cooperation and equality. Sounds like Ben and Jerry's. And that would be internally focused and flexible. So involvement is actually a decent culture, I would say too. And then you have a consistency culture, stable, values following the rules and thriftiness, and rewards a methodical, rational, orderly way of doing things. That's a consistency culture, which is stable and internally focused. So an involvement culture and a consistency culture cares a lot about the employees. A adaptability culture and achievement culture cares a lot about the customers. And so there's an interesting dynamic going on there. There's no bad thing to say about any of these cultures. They're just different. It depends on the industry. Again, a startup that just got $100 million in venture capital funding to build a product better have an adaptability culture. I mean, some kind of got to find customers and we got to be willing to change. If you are settled, and again, if you're in the banking industry, there might be more of what would be a consistency culture and achievement culture. So you're a little bit more stable. You get the idea. I find that one to be an interesting one. Hopefully, this conversation tonight kind of alludes the necessity of leaders to care about culture and just how much cultures can impact the way people behave. And certainly thinking through the concept of are they behaving ethically or are they not behaving ethically? Well, leaders and culture can determine that. Checklist of questions to ask before going to external sources. Have I exhausted? Oh, so this is about whistleblowing. This is about, say you work in a company now, or you maybe work in a company in the future, and you've noticed something that isn't right within the culture. People are stealing stuff, or just that toxic behaviors happening. Maybe there's sexual harassment. There are things that are happening that are not okay. The question is, should I go and say something to somebody and tell somebody about what's happening and be formal about it? Well, ask yourself this question. Have I exhausted internal anonymous reporting opportunities within the organization? Does your organization even have that? Some anonymous internal reporting mechanism where you can tell somebody what's going on through a survey or through some kind of feedback form that can't be traced back to you. If you've done that and that hasn't done anything, then you might want to take another step. Have I examined company policies and codes that outline acceptable behavior and violation of standards? This might help you if you have a contract of sorts, if you have an employment agreement, if you have a code of conduct or a handbook from your organization. Pop that thing into ChatGPT and ask, hey, I've noticed these behaviors. According to the handbook, are these behaviors acceptable? And yes, why or why not? And should I go to my manager and report this? These are fundamental questions. Is this a personal issue that should be resolved through other means? This is a very important one. I also want to hone in on this for a second. If you have a personal issue with somebody within the organization, what I always recommend, and I'll say this from my perspective, is that my duty is to go to that person and to approach them and explain to them what they're doing and how that makes me feel, and how I would like them to stop doing whatever it is they're doing, or um, explain to them that it's not okay, that it's damaging either you or the company or something. And so my daughter is getting bullied at school by this one particular guy, and I won't share all the details, but she was telling me about it this weekend. And I explained to her, I said, listen, bullies are going to exist most of your life in some sense, like in one form or another. There's people that you're not going to agree with that might treat you in a bad way. So I said, you can learn from this experience with this person. And what I asked her to do, I said, if this person, if you see him this week or today, if they start bullying you, thank them for teaching you how not to act. Say, "Oh, thank you so much for showing me exactly how I don't wanna be or how I don't wanna act," and turn around and leave. And standing up to them in a sense of not being physically violent unless it comes to that, but approaching them with confidence and almost understanding that these people are gonna exist, but I'm not to back away or cower in front of these types of people. I'm meant to stand my ground on my ethical floor and my value system and approach them with dignity and confidence and show and set the tone of how we're supposed to act in school or with our friends, and how what I'm doing is standing up to the bully, and what everybody else is doing, if they're cowering or coming behind the bully or whatever that looks like, that's not okay. And a lot of times what'll happen is people will get on the side of the good person. I have a traumatic event, I guess, in a sense, because there was a friend of mine in school. This is when I was in 7th grade. That was one of the nicest guys you can imagine. He was quiet, he was reserved, he was a little bit overweight. His name was Kyle, and I really liked Kyle, and he was my friend. And unfortunately, I saw him get jumped in the hallway by 2 bullies, straight up bullies. I knew these people were just looking for fights, and they were bad news. And Kyle, unfortunately, looked like he ran across this person, and there was 2 of them on one. So obviously Kyle was like trying to hold his ground, but he couldn't. There were 2 of them, and I did nothing. I didn't step in. I didn't help him. I didn't even try to break up the fight. I just watched it, and I've pains myself even to this day because I didn't stand up to the bullies, and everybody that was there was like 15 people watching this, but nobody did anything. And if I had done something, if I just stepped in and tried to break up the fight or just try to protect Kyle in some way or another, or even not had his back, it very well could have diminished the fuse of these 2 bullies indefinitely, and I could have saved, in a sense, a lot of people's pain in the future because these 2 bullies would have been hushed, quieted, because they saw that somebody's willing to step up and stand up against them. And I know these are sort of um, abstract stories I'm trying to share, but in the work environment, it's no different. Creating a culture of respect and honesty and transparency and being authentic and being willing to stand up to people who maybe aren't performing or doing things the way they're supposed to be doing is a good deal. And it's a person if you have a personal issue that should be resolved, going to that person first and trying to correct that behavior could be the best thing you can do. Can I manage the stress that may result from exposing potential wrongdoing in an organization? What if I get fired? Can I handle that? What if I tell on this person and that person's sort of in with the wrongdoer, and now I have 2 people coming against me? Am I willing to handle that? What if my name gets out there and I blew the whistle on these folks, and my name's now out there and everybody knows that I'm the whistleblower and I get all sorts of media attention? Can I handle that? Can I deal with the consequences of resolving an ethical or legal conflict within the organization? Can I deal with potential consequences like getting fired? So these are just things to consider before, I guess, telling on or formally reporting some sort of ethical behavior in an organization. So these are 2 different ways in which organizations are structured. You have a centralized organization, a decentralized organization. These 2 different ways an organization is structured. A centralized organizations, a lot of the decision making is held at the top of the organization. Decentralized is it's a more flat of an organization where a lot of people get to make decisions. So the ways in which an organization is structured, and I'll keep it as simple as this, does determine types of behavior that's happening as well. It contributes to the culture. A centralized organization, uh, they make high risk decisions that have lower level managers, not highly skilled in decision making, typically have little upward communication, strict formalization, may be more ethical than decentralized. Okay, think of I hate to use the Harry Potter reference, but Hermione has a great relationship with one of her professors, and Hermione is she's follows the rules a little bit more than say Harry or this other guy that is in Harry Potter that's friends with Harry. I forget his name. Ron Weasley. And so Hermione has this like centralized. She's immediately connected with the teacher, so she might be less interested in breaking the rules, and she might go straight to the teacher to tell on them or something like that. But now let's say that teacher's gone and there's like 4 different managers that all have this equal authority, and Harry's working for one of them and Ron's working for another one, and Hermione's working for another one, and they're sort of all on different teams, and it's decentralized. It's a different dynamic. The people within an organization are going to make different decisions, and the flow of information in both directions, managers can react more quickly to changes with a decentralized organization. So I don't probably talk about this more, but I don't want to confuse anyone. But the point is that when you have a centralized organization where only one or two people make all the decisions versus a decentralized organization where, say, 10 different people make decisions, it determines behavior as well. And as you can see in some, it actually talks about it here, a hierarchy of authority in a centralized organization is very hierarchical authority chain of command. Decentralized organizations, not so much. Flexibility is low and centralized, it's high and decentralized. Adaptability is low and centralized, high and decentralized. Problem recognition is low and centralized, high and decentralized. As you can see, decentralized, you would think you want a flexible, adaptable, problem recognizing culture. So highly decentralized could potentially lead to less ethical issues, meaning if you have a centralized organization, you might have a propensity for more things slipping through the cracks ethically. Implementation, centralized is high, decentralized is low. Dealing with changes, centralized is poor, decentralized is good. Rules and procedures, it's a centralized organization, many informal, decentralized, few and informal. Let's talk about that for a second. So now in a decentralized organization, there's not as many rules and it's less formal. That too could lead to potential gray areas where unethical behavior happens. In a formal organization, you might not have um, as many gray areas, but you probably could have less productivity because people are not sure how to act. So, anyways, that's kind of the gist of that. I think this is important to go over. Um, you have this big company with this culture and the way people act, the values that they put out there, and let's just say that the company culture is good. Of course, now you have these different groups within the company, and that there'll be a culture within, like, say, the team of nurses, and there's a culture within a team of doctors, and there's a culture within a team of administration, and the cultures are different. They might all fall under this company, but they're different. So it's important to understand that is that there's formal groups and informal groups too. The formal groups an assembly of individuals with an organized structure that is explicitly accepted by the group, the doctors. An informal group is two or more individuals with a common interest, but without an explicit organizational structure. So let's say the informal group would be me, and let's say Jennifer and Gabriella, and we don't work in the same department. We're just friends, but we're not formalized in any kind of way as a group. But we always go out to lunch, on Tuesdays at the taco spot. And when we get together, we're talking about the company, we're talking about the people, and we're sort of gossiping. Gossiping is the wrong word. We're talking about the grapevine, and because we're on the same page, we have an ability to influence other people. People see us going out to lunch, they hear what we have to talk about. I say, "Well, did you hear what Gabby said?" So there's an informal group taking place, and that those informal groups also have an influence over culture and an influence over other people's behaviors. This is a difference in a team and a group. I'm not going to go into that. Group norms. Okay, here's an interesting one. Variations in employee conduct. Funny, this is funny. 10% follow their own values and beliefs, believe that their values are superior to those of others in the company. So 10% of the people, according to the science, estimates based on the author's research and reports from ethics and compliance officers from many industries. 10% of the people, let's say if you have 100 people in your company, 10 people think that their values are superior than the company's. Okay, fair enough. The other 10%, the other extreme, take advantage of situations if the penalty is less than the benefit and the risk of being caught is low. That's the example that I used when if you steal a bunch of office supplies, and then people usually don't get caught. And if they got caught, it's not that big of a penalty. You're just going to go ahead and steal office supplies. Why not? So 10% of the people take advantage of the lack of formality in the rules or the culture in the organization. So they take advantage. Now, 40% in the middle over here towards the left always try to follow company policies. That's like the Hermione type. Let's try to follow all the rules. I hate to use her as an example. She's kind of a rule breaker too, but always got to follow the rules. And then the other 40% go along with the work group, meaning they're not the ones following the rules. They're just going to do what everyone else is doing. So if you can see, some people think that their values are better than the company. Some people are manipulative and take advantage of the culture and sometimes break the rules. Some people follow the rules according to the policy, and other people just follow whatever else anyone else is doing. So there's the four different aspects of behavior within the organization. I think that's fascinating. They don't know how to act. So how
Yeah,
does the company's organizational culture, meaning what the company's actually doing, like the culture is you can't the culture is existing. You can't just change it overnight. Like this is how people are behaving. That's the organizational culture. Appear to conflict with the ethical policy. So this ethical policy is a code of conduct. It's written. Here's how we act. Here's how we train our employees. Here's what we say we're going to do. But here's the reality of our culture. So clearly there's a conflict there, right? So the question said, what are the options for Sarah if this was retaliation? So now Sarah's at home. She's fired. She's no longer with this organization. She was told it was because of performance. And then she finds out, no, it's not because of performance. It's because I whistle blew on somebody's behavior, and Emma and my manager went into cahoots and fired me because I whistle blew. Now she has something to kiss. So let's get out of that Sarah situation for a second. Let's go to Muhammad. What should Muhammad do next? Um, who was Muhammad in this story? The story was about Muhammad. What was his position? Human resources, right? He was in charge of creating these policies and enforcing these policies and training people on these policies, like Sophia said. So now he's in charge. He is associated with an organization that is saying one thing but doing another. So then I asked the question again, what does Muhammad do next? Oh, so the story, let me be clear. The story is very clear. What happened was Sarah went to Muhammad. Sarah's an employee, went to Muhammad, who works in human resources. Imagine yourself in Sarah's position. And the company code and conduct and the way in which the policy is written says you can come to people in HR and we will hold your name in confidentiality, completely anonymous. You could tell us if one of your managers is treating you poorly, and we will take that information and we won't tell anybody that you brought it to us, and we'll address it appropriately. So Sarah did that according to her rights in the company and explained that her manager was speaking ill and doing things poorly and making derogatory comments about people, was creating a toxic work environment. Sarah went to Muhammad, said, "Hey, this is what's going on." Muhammad said, "Thank you so much for coming to me and telling me this. This is really good information." He took that information down. He brought it to Emma, his boss, who hired him, and said, "Here's what Sarah said," and obviously keep her name anonymous. Emma then went to the boss and said, "Oh, by the way, Sarah told Muhammad that you're acting like a jerk. What should we do?" And the boss and Emma decided to fire Sarah. Well, Emma works in human resources. Emma is Muhammad's boss. And Emma and Muhammad work to create and foster a culture in this organization. And what they're saying is not matching up to what they're doing. Let me be candid and Chris for some of the people who are following me. Sarah got fired because of two punks in this organization. Does that help? Does that help at all? Muhammad was like, wait a minute. I'm here at this company. You guys are training me up on this great culture that we have here. And this is what I know. And I'm an ethically driven human being. And now I'm in this organization and you've given me some leadership and I'm walking out the things that we're supposed to be doing. And I go ahead and do the things that we're supposed to be doing. And then you wrongfully retaliate against an innocent person and fire them on my watch. So I ask again, what should Muhammad do? So think about this practically. Emma works in HR. She's the manager of HR. This other guy is like the manager of sales, like whatever. And then Sarah was an innocent person. Don't you think there's a CEO in this company somewhere? Don't you think that Emma has a boss? Don't you think the CEO should know what the heck is going on his watch? And don't you think Emma's boss should be on top of her and saying, what? Because Emma is the one who's not doing her job. This situation that's happening here between Sarah's boss and Sarah. Sarah's boss is not doing things the way he should be doing it. Let's just say he's acting like a fool. This guy, he's a problem, right? Sarah, instead of just going him, and maybe she did go to him. Sarah goes to HR and says, "Hey, Mohammed, I'm going to take you up on that confidentiality agreement that you presented us, and that's a policy here at this organization. I'm going to tell you anonymously that my boss is acting a fool. He's he's acting like an idiot. You know what I mean? He needs to change his ways." And so Muhammad hears this story from Sarah and says, "Thank you so much. I will keep your information anonymous, and I will take this information. And we're going to do something about it. We're going to go to say we're going to see if we can correct this behavior over here. Follow me?" Now Muhammad goes to his boss, Emma, and says, "Hey, here's the report that says I talked to Sarah. Sarah gave me this information about her boss, and it's clearly a problem. We're obviously going to keep her name anonymous because she didn't need to come to us and tell us this, but she did, and she's the innocent victim here, whatever that looks like." And Emma goes, "Oh, thank you so much." And then 2 days later, or maybe a week later, whatever that looks like, um, Sarah gets fired. Gone, right? And so Muhammad's like, what happened? Muhammad goes to Emma and said, "Hey, what happened? Was this a retaliation thing?" And Emma said, "Yeah, I went ahead and I talked to Sarah's boss about the report, and I told Sarah's boss that Sarah said these things about him, and Emma and Sarah's boss are friends, right? And so they decided that they were going to fire Sarah over what they're calling a performance issue." That's the story. There's a lot going on there, but hopefully that helped. But here's the thing, and the reason why I'm sticking to this, and I'm not letting you out because I got 4 minutes left, is because I genuinely care about you all, like I do, and I care about what I'm doing as a professor. And one of you has probably experienced something like this in your past. You've either seen it, you've either been a part of it, or maybe it's happening right now. I don't know. Most of you in the future are going to experience a situation. If you don't, then praise God, at work where you're going to notice stuff like this, that there's retaliatory behavior because there's these informal groups and they're not abiding by the company's rules and policies. They're breaking the rules and then doing things unethically, and they're using their power in a harmful way against innocent people. Problem. And I want to know, if you're Muhammad, what do you do about it? And my suggestion would be, and again, this is going to be up to you. I'm not here to provide answers. I'm just here to provide situations that need to be navigated through, is that Muhammad should lose all of his trust in Emma, all of it, and say, Emma is discredited in my book as a human resource professional. Like, I'm sorry, that ship has sailed. And there's two things that he can do. He can go to Emma's boss and say, listen, here's the story. I'm coming out with it right now. In addition to confronting Emma and saying, oh, by the way, I went to your boss, the CEO, and I told him what you did to Sarah. So there's two things that can happen there. So the question is Muhammad going to receive consequences for that behavior? He's new at this company. Or is he going to do what we hope is going to happen, is the CEO is going to listen to him, confront Emma on the situation, potentially let Emma go, and Muhammad can step in and be the righteous influencer of the Department of HR within his company and change the company culture to become more ethical, to abide by the ethical standards that they originally wrote into the handbook and the way in which they're training employees, and to actually enforce them correctly, not for personal gain or personal power, and move forward as a leader of that organization. That's a tough road right there. A tough road. And that's a dilemma that I'm leaving you all with tonight. Again, I feel a bit of guilt. I apologize for the curse words in um, that movie, but clearly, hopefully, it created some emotional response to draw out these different concepts of culture and what it does to behavior and how it can influence people negatively or positively. And even if it does influence them positively, the question is, for how long does that positive influence take effect? And what are some of the unintended consequences that can happen if you have a strictly performance-based culture? I also want to delineate the fact that you want people to come to your office, your work environment, with their head, their brain, and their heart. You want them to trust and believe that this company is doing the right thing, and also work on a performance base to say, I like what's going on here. Having high consideration is important. We care about you. We want the best for you. Also, by the way, let's initiate some structure because we care about you. We're going to provide you with some boundaries here, some guidelines. We're going to provide you with some performance objectives, some KPIs, so you know what to do and how to do it. Culture is so important. It changes the way people behave, and it's highly impactful for leaders to shape culture in order to achieve ethical goals within an organization. Hopefully, that point came across tonight. I appreciate you bearing with my obsessive amounts of talking, but hopefully, you're able to learn something. And